Hi guys, welcome to another video presentation on the Crucible. Today we are going to be looking at Act 1 Part 2, which is starting from the entrance of John Proctor and finishing at the entrance of Reverend Hale. Let's dive in. Okay, so now that you have read or listened through the scene, there are a few things I'd like to point out to you and draw your attention to, and to also get you to think a little bit more about before we look at this section in more detail. So firstly, I would like to talk to you about witchcraft in New England. So a few contextual aspects that I think could be quite helpful for you to know. So just want to remind you that when we are coming to the play, it's at a time when Salem had been in existence for only about 40 years. So its inhabitants would naturally feel isolated, insecure, and vulnerable. Okay, so just because of where they are and their situation, the people in Salem would already feel isolated, insecure, and vulnerable. So that is their mental state at a constant level. So when you add into this the aspects of witchcraft, and that everyone seems to be often all of these things. A lot of the characters in the plays seem to be isolated, they seem to be insecure, and they seem to be quite vulnerable. Some characters experience one of these more than others. Paris continues to go on about wanting to have security in his position. A lot of the girls like Abigail, they are quite vulnerable, and these people are isolated. So to add to that, there's also this constant hostility. The hostility comes from the native Indians because of their constant attacks on the Puritans. And the attitude they had, that the Puritans had towards the wood, was about the woods being the devil's territory. So any place that was uninhabited, that was dark and mysterious and wild, where people, in a sense, had very little knowledge about, that was the devil's territory, which is why Tituba and the girls had gone there. So Indians, for the Puritans, were the devil's agents. This was the prejudice that they had towards the Indians. Interestingly, when they emigrated to America to escape persecution for their religious beliefs, the Puritans, they kind of expected persecution of one sort or another. So they were already prepped and primed, ready for persecution. And often some people welcomed it because they felt that it was evidence that God was testing them. By facing this adversity, by facing persecution, and staunchly, they could see that they were glorifying God and making their own community an outstanding example to others. So whenever they faced difficulties and hardships, they saw it as an opportunity to glorify God. And they very much had this mentality of the collective and the community rather than the individual. So that is one aspect I wanted to draw your attention to about witchcraft in Salem. Another aspect is the attitudes towards witchcraft, that in a sense people believed in witchcraft, and not just that, but they actually practiced witchcraft. Okay, people would dabble in witchcraft of one form of another. And so there are three different types of witchcraft that people that historically people have evidence that people in Massachusetts were doing. The first one is white magic. Now with white magic, and many of you would know this, is that it's kind of always been seen as the good magic. So it's use of charms and spells to bring good luck to the user and to protect him from evil spirits. And then you have what you would probably be familiar with is the black magic. So black magic, or the malicious use of charms and spells that were used to harm others. So for example, sticking a pin into an image of another person in the belief that this would magically cause physical pain or death to that person. And this is what Elizabeth was accused of in the play. Then there was a third type of magic, and this had something to do, more explicitly, to do with the devil. So there was a belief that people, black magic is all about, with the third type of magic, it is about entering into a pact with the devil. And so if you do that, the witch, because if you're entering into a pact, you must be a devil, must be a witch, and if you're dabbling in witchcraft, you must be a witch. The witch promises to serve the devil in return for certain favours and magic powers. So that's what people not only believed, but that's also what people practiced. So people who believe in witchcraft can very easily persuade themselves of its effectiveness. Adolescents, in particular, may frighten themselves into believing that they have seen some supernatural phenomenon, or that symptoms of illness may indeed have been caused by an enemy. So I think that we can interpret the play in two different ways. That we can see that that the girls who accuse the witches, it's all about them being malicious. It's play acting. People who fear it are simple, superstitious, and credulous. And so we can have a real kind of rational response, and that the authorities who bring people to trial and condemn them for witchcraft do so from a cynical desire to exploit the situation to their own advantage and to strengthen their control over the populace. So that's one interpretation we can have. Or we can see that actually people genuinely believed in witchcraft, people practiced witchcraft, and that because we are rationalists in our modern world, we often wouldn't believe that to be the case, but we could actually see that people in the play generally did believe that this witchcraft was actually happening. So what you need to think about is, which of these interpretations does the Crucible support? And then see if you can see this in the play, and what interpretation you have, and where that is supported in the play. Okay, so that's witchcraft in Massachusetts that I wanted to talk to you about. I also wanted to draw your attention to one more idea, if I may, and that is to do with open, this idea of open versus closed spaces. And this is an idea that we can pick up throughout the play. And it's not a hugely obvious one, but once you're aware of it, you will be able to see how it is developed and how it leads to other ideas. I see that this is explored in this act through the contrast between the village of Salem and the forest. So the forest is considered to be the devil's last preserve, his home base and the citadel of his final stand. It's considered off limits to the members of Salem society, and it is associated with the wild Indian tribes which live there. However, it is within this open place where there is no one watching that the girls are able to be free. So this world allows the characters to be free. And it allows them a place of escape, allows them to have a place away from the scrutiny. And this is suggested by the image of the girls dancing in the forest. In contrast, the interaction between the characters in this act takes place in Paris's home. And there seems to be no freedom at all. All the characters are being scrutinised by each other. For example, the Putnams arrive to take great pleasure in seeing the Paris's distress about his daughter's health. And as the act progresses and more characters enter, there seems to be no freedom. And there's a real sense of claustrophobia and oppression that really heightens throughout this act. The fact that open spaces provide freedom is further highlighted, I think, through the fact that Proctor and Abigail, where it says, let's see if I can find it, where Proctor and Abigail, they give in to their desires when Abigail says to Proctor, "You clutched my back behind your house." And this really is revealing that outside of their homes, the characters are able to be who they desire and do whatever they wish to do. So be aware of this idea and how we have this sense of inside and outside, freedom versus oppression. We have these ideas of being an individual and being autonomous, or being oppressed. Okay, let's have a look at the first part of this section. As with the previous section, it's interesting to note that whenever a character enters, often the action seems to either heighten or deflate or shift in mood and emphasis. So we have, before John Proctor enters, we have a real culmination of fear and hysteria with the girls. We have threats of violence and you know, obvious physical cruelty by the girls, and we see Abigail in the lead with that. And then we note a contrast created in Abigail in particular when John Proctor enters. So here we are introduced to John Proctor. We see him as an independent man and not easily influenced by others. He is honest and quite blunt about how what he thinks and he's not afraid to express his views. He has flaws, and I see him here as a real conflicted character. But interestingly, even though he has flaws, and I think all the characters in this play have flaws, John Proctor recognises them and endeavours not to be hypocritical. Now, he tries to be hypocritical, but I don't necessarily think that he's always successful in that. He is not easily led, which is what we are told. So this demonstrates to us that he is independent and that he seems to go against the collective, the community. He is the individual that moves to the beat of his own drum rather than that of the community. It is possible that John Proctor is seen as the ideal hero by Miller, as he is the character seen who is not trying to follow all of society's rules, and there are many. He's open about his feelings towards Paris's sermons, which I think is very funny. He doesn't try to pretend that he believes in what Paris says, where he says to Paris later on in this section, "The last meeting I were at, you spoke so long on deeds and mortgages, I thought it were an auction." So he's fairly blunt about his opinions, which unfortunately I think doesn't help him and could in fact be a big influence on his own demise. And he's also presented as a sinner. He is a sinner not only against the moral fashion of the time, but against his own vision of decent conduct. He has come to regard himself as a kind of fraud. And I find that really interesting, that he sees himself as a sinner against his own vision of decent conduct. So here we have a man who has an integrity, has ideals and what he sees as decent conduct, and he judges others against that standard, and he judges himself. And it's in one of those situations where often you have these standards of what you see as decent conduct, and you do exactly what you think is the wrong thing, and then part of how you feel about that is wrapped up in your own disappointment in yourself. You are disappointed in yourself, you're frustrated, you're angry with yourself because you've let yourself down. And we often feel that way. And this is what John Proctor feels. He is, in a sense, punishing himself, and he is conflicted because of this situation. So what I like about Proctor is that he recognises that he has faults. But despite that, he does have a really clear moral compass, and he endeavours not to be hypocritical. So he judges himself against these rules as well as others. And I think this is a deliberate creation in Arthur Miller so that Proctor is set apart from the other characters, and he is often used as a foil for us to sort of see what more clearly and more obviously the character traits in the other characters. So I'd just like to, before we go on, I'd like to make a little note about Abigail, little Abby. So we know that Miller has followed pretty closely the historical sources for this period of time. He has veered away a little bit with the representations of some of the characters. So the original John Proctor seems to have been a rougher, less sensitive man than his counterpart in the play. But the most significant change Miller makes in terms of the characters is in terms with Abigail. So interestingly, Abigail was only 12 years of age, whereas in the Crucible we know that he's made her much older as a 17-year-old. So as students of literature, and at this point when we're looking at our genre study of students of drama, I would like you to remember that we're not studying history, we're not looking at this play as historians. So we need to ask why Miller made this change. Why did he make Abigail older? And what dramatic purpose does this serve? So I'd like you to write down a few ideas here as to what you think. What dramatic purpose does it serve to have Abigail older? to have Abigail and John Proctor in a relationship. Write down some ideas. It's really important for you to always be thinking about the reason for what Arthur Miller is doing. So bring it back to what's the dramatic purpose of this. Okay, so what I want you to really pay attention to here is how Abigail and in fact Mercy respond to John Proctor when he comes. It's interesting to see that both of the girls are afraid of him and strangely titillated, which is basically they're excited. There's something about him that they are drawn to. It may be because of his physical strength as being a farmer. It may be because he is more independent than the other people and that he's not afraid to express his opinion. There is obviously something that they are drawn to with him. It may be because Mercy knows about Abigail's relationship with Proctor as well. So I want you to pay attention to the verbs used in the stage directions about how Abigail behaves, because the verbs indicate to us not just how people are acting but also how they are feeling, and it's in direct contrast, I think, to the actions of Abigail before Proctor arrives. So you can see here that Abigail, when as soon as Proctor arrives, she has stood on tiptoe, absorbing his presence, wide-eyed. And in contrast, he glances at her. Okay, he's not trying to respond in the same way. He's trying to keep it very formal, I guess. And throughout the play, throughout this scene, I mean, Abigail is seeking to undermine that. So Abigail has a nervous laugh. She winningly comes a little closer with a wicked air. And then later on, her concentrated desire, concentrated desire. But before that, we can see that she's still coming a bit closer towards him, feverishly looking to his eyes. And so her passion for him is obvious. Her desire for him is obvious. Her desire for the physical contact goes throughout the scene. And then she's still trying to control and manipulate him, and at the point where she's now taunting him. So we can see that she gets quite desperate when she grasps his hand. And so it's interesting to see how her behaviour now is very different to what it was like before, and how we can see the duplicity in the characters. Interestingly also, they're not alone. We get a sense that they are, but we have to remember that Betty is still lying on the bed. And we need to be thinking about, well, what is she doing? What is she hearing? What is she thinking? What is Betty up to? Now, it's interesting to see in the way that Abigail and Proctor talk to each other, it really seems to indicate a sense of familiarity. When Abigail says to John Proctor, I'd almost forgot how strong you are, John. And then John replies by, with this knowing smile, what's this mischief here? Okay, this indicates to us that they know each other on familiar terms, even intimate terms. He's not deceived by Abigail. He knows what she's really like. And at this point, Abigail is not willing to even reveal to John what they have been up to. And so she is still adhering to her position that there was nothing. We didn't do anything. We're just doing a bit of dancing. There is no such thing as witchcraft here. Okay? And this is often done in order to protect herself, because she knows that by telling the truth, that's only going to get into more trouble. So here they're in a situation where they, in a sense, a lot of people feel like they don't have any other choice but to lie, because the truth is much worse and will get them into more trouble. And we also get this sense that John almost enjoys and likes this more wicked, naughty side of Abigail. And, you know, and to pretend, you know, you don't know whether or not he is encouraging her or condemning her in this moment. And so it's interesting to see that that he's some points we could see that he's almost drawn back to her, and he's constantly fighting with his conscience. And so she senses that, and so that's why when she's gradually getting closer to him, and she doesn't do it straight away. And then she just can't help it anymore. She just wants a word, a soft word, and this is a girl who seems to be quite starved of physical connection, any form of love and intimacy. And so she is quite desperate, and potentially this is the only person in her life who has shown her kindness and love and physical affection. Now, we don't know that. We're just making these assumptions here. But he rejects her. That's done with. And then because she's not getting what she wants, she will continue to, I guess, be provocative and to flirt, and using that as a way to take charge of the situation. And so it does raise questions as to why Proctor has come. So he says to her earlier, I've become because the road past my house is a pilgrimage to Salem. And so he's come to see what all the fuss is about. But why has he come, and why has he stayed when he can see that it's just Abigail and Betty in the room? What's he up to? Why has he really come? He says later that he's come to see what mischief your uncle's brewing now. And it's an interesting use of the word brewing, because that has connotations of witchcraft. And I wonder whether this is deliberate on Proctor's part, using that word. And does he use it with sort of a tongue-in-cheek way? And this also reveals to us that how Proctor feels about Paris. He doesn't trust him. He doesn't respect him. He suspects Paris is up to something, which will usually be something for Paris's own ambition and gain. But Abby's not one for getting distracted with what she wants, and she turns the conversation back on their relationship, and she confesses and reveals here that I've been waiting for you every night, and this then gives us more information about their relationship. Proctor says, you know, I never gave you hope to wait for me. And then she says, getting quite angry, so we can see how quick she is with her emotions. She doesn't seem to control her emotions very well, which is in contrast to John Proctor, who seems to be trying really hard to control himself. And she says, I have something better than hope, I think. And we have to stop and wonder, what is she referring to here? Is she referring to their physical relationship they had? She's insinuating that she's got something more concrete than just hope, more real than just hope, and that relationship that they had. But despite all her efforts, Proctor continues to remain quite firm with Abigail. And he wants to move on from this relationship so that he no longer has to be reminded of what he's done, of the betrayal that he has demonstrated.